welcome everybody to our artist roundtable for Live Life Fearless. Just wanted to kind of get everybody together and kind of talk about the current events and things that are happening, around the U.S. and around the world, obviously. But before we start, just hope everybody's staying safe with all this pandemic and COVID and protesting going on. If everybody wants to give a quick introduction to themselves for everybody that doesn't know.
Actually, I'll start since I'm on the panel, and also by saying that I think that every artist on the panel here has like a unique perspective that is related to, being a human being and the politics that are related to oppression and what other people say you're allowed to do in your life. And I think all of us sort of like struggle with society and sort of create work that sort of reflects on aspects of that. So I think it's really cool to get all these individuals together in a time like this and chat about important stuff. But I'm an artist, Dáreece Walker, based out of Brooklyn, New York right now. And I'll pass it over to whoever wants to go next.
I'll go next. My name is Sara Meghdari, and I'm also an artist. And my work is largely driven by my bicultural background, half Iranian and half American. But I grew up in Iran, which shaped a lot of how I think, and my life in the United States has been a trip, and just trying to understand more about why things are the way they are, and how we can harness this energy and focus it, because I think just a lot of what is happening right now affects everybody, and different people to different variations, but I think it's important for everybody to be active about it. So I do it in my way, in my lane, with my work and my background specifically, but that's what my work is about a little bit.
Okay.
I will go next.
All right.
So my name is Lale. I am an artist. I'm based in Brooklyn. I'm from Greece. I came to the States like 6 years ago. And my work has to do with the global refugee crisis. And I'm mostly making work referring to my family history of forced migration. My grandfather was a refugee from Turkey to Greece in the 1920s. And also at the last 2 years, I'm working on this body of work that is about cancer awareness and the human right to health care, which is a very big issue in the States, and especially now with the COVID, we see more of it. Like, people don't go to the hospital because they don't have access to healthcare. But I think that's it. I'm sorry. Okay. I'm a little nervous.
Yeah, that's all right. Marvin, you want to go next?
So I am Marvin Touré. I am an artist currently based in New York City. My work kind of really is about visualizing an interior life affected by mental illness, and it's kind of in interrogating that, and then also its connection with like the Black experience. So I also talk about like my cross-cultural identity of being an African-American, first-generation American. My entire family's from Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa. And for me, I get pulling from my heritage, but then also this very very specific upbringing of being West African, growing up in the South, dealing with anti-Blackness from Black people, dealing with anti-Blackness from whites in the South, navigating that environment, and then also being a Black nerdy kid, you know, who's into hip hop, but then also dealing with issues of mental health, mental illness and mental health. And so I talk about that in my work. I use a lot of the objects of innocence, kind of like action figures, toys, and comic book imagery from my childhood in order to kind of use that as a threshold to be able to talk about these issues. Because a lot of times people, when people see some of this imagery, it's disarming at first, but then to use it to talk about something that is a lot of times very painful and nuanced is, you know, kind of where I draw my inspiration from, and kind of where I carve out space for myself in my art practice.
Okay. Sasha, if you want to go next.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm glad for folks to take the time to be here and to chat. I'm currently at a park, so there's some noises. I apologize for that. Okay, yeah, my name is Sasha. My practice is a little bit all over the place, but right now I'm focusing on music and the subliminal messages that's within that. Social practice is a big part of my work. So before COVID, that was putting on events, conferences, retreats, parties, different social gatherings. And since COVID, it's been organizing with different collectives on actions that are happening in the Bay Area. And then also just supporting community. So like right now I'm at a Black healing clinic, and there's different practitioners here that are offering free services for folks in the community.
Okay.
So I'm excited to bring my perspective while I'm like on break from supporting this.
All right, cool. Melvin, you want to go next? Is he in there? Yeah, I think you got him.
Oh yeah, there you
go. All right, there you
go. Yeah, hi, I'm Melvin Harper. My practice, well, it's difficult to say about my background and practice because the practice is, it's kind of questioning the authenticity of what makes up your background and how you draw the roots of what constitute your race, heritage, and then how those things translate into a biopolitical identity that's exploited or targeted. So I do that mostly through film and sculpture.
Okay. And Ventiko. See if I can unmute you. There you go.
Hi, I'm Ventiko. I'm in I'm on a new discovery path right now with my work. What I used to say is I decided to read my statement that I'm a conceptual artist working in photography, performative experiences, and social practice. Majority of my work is about identity and how do we determine what that is, how do we perform it, and I do that through my favorite performances in the street and using my body, often for photographic like opportunities. Basically, I make sets, I'm naked, I have other people, I invite them in to make a demonstration in real time that we actually can reconstruct the narrative and the truths that we've been told, which are actually incorrect. And another is I make wearable sculptures out of milk cartons from a nursery school around the corner. I've been working on that since 2010, which actually, because my mom had cancer, and that was the impetus for that like repetitive Zen work. And also just providing opportunities for true connection. And the third component, the social practice, also to echo Sasha, it's I really love to create opportunities for people to shine. I think that's really, really important in the world. So,
All right.
well, I mean, there won't be any nude collaborative moments happening with like tons of people in the near forever. So I have no idea what I'm going to do now. So like, I'm free floating in the free fall.
Yeah, it definitely has probably changed things for a lot of you guys. But on top of all the pandemic stuff, there's also obviously been the current things going on with protesting and like racial justice and all these social causes that have been kind of tearing through the country and through the world in general. So I just kind of want to give, just general thoughts and opinions from you guys. And I don't know if Dáreece, you want to start things off?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of stuff going on that led up to protesting. So it's like really interesting. Just it seems like a bunch of stuff kept adding to it. So it kept getting more fuel. And it wasn't it's like it's hard to say that we're protesting about George Floyd. We're protesting for him, and we are protesting for all the other Black people that are essentially just overlooked and disregarded in situations that are similar and all too often recurring.
Yeah.
So Breonna Taylor, who was, an essential worker. So in the time of a pandemic and everyone rallying to support essential workers, a story like that comes out, which was buried because it happened before the pandemic, or at least like the same week that a shutdown happened. So the way news trickles out and things like that, but it seems to all be coming to a head based on the police officers. So we're not so much protesting just that people are dying, but that there's no consequences for when it happens and we see it on camera or otherwise. So I don't know, maybe just I want to open up the floor to people to like what your emotions were just seeing the protest, because it happened worldwide, which is crazy. So just like, I don't know. It's a good place to start because it's sort of like, the most impactful and pending thing that's, sort of surrounding it, the George Floyd situation. And I keep saying his name, but, there's so many other people. There was another guy. There's a bunch of people. It's just hard to, I don't want to keep rambling, but.
Yeah, everybody can just hop in as they want,
Yeah, I think it's also very important that the protest is focusing on police reform and how to redirect the budget for the police, like defund the police.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very important that it's out there, and I believe that we can see a change with that.
Definitely.
If you're able to, make sure that you vote.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not able to yet, but.
It's my idea.
Oh, yeah,
good. All right, cool. So I've had I think a mix of emotions in this current climate, because there's nothing really current about this climate. Us getting gunned down in the street by cops, us being, us meaning, Black bodies. Tony Mcgary is another person who, a trans man who was killed. This isn't new. And I remember vividly marching for Eric Gardner, Sandra Bland marching for Trayvon, being in the streets, even for just local things that would happen in Atlanta, being involved in activities to help our community, whether it was like sleeping out for the homeless to build awareness about homeless in our neighborhoods, or like doing, or soup kitchens, or, you know, talking about police brutality, and you know, walks and talks and all of these other things. I think the and why at some point now I find it hard to articulate the complexity of the emotions is because it's like it comes in waves. Like at times I don't realize how much rage that has been like accumulating and settling in over time. I don't realize like how much heartbreak, how much disappointment, frustration settles over time. And it's just like becomes layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of emotion that a lot of times when you get heinous acts of tyranny like we've seen in the streets that happen, those emotions bubble over and they burst over into what we have as like, you know, massive protests or looting, rioting, whatever have you. There's an interesting kind of inflection point now where there seems to be a wave or a outpouring of support for Black bodies. And almost like a crowd of people have like emerged into an amphitheater and have started to sing support for our bodies. And my response to that is, what the fuck took y'all so long? Because during, like, we're still in a global pandemic.
Yeah.
So a couple months ago, the news came out that Black and brown bodies were disproportionately getting affected by COVID-19. And subtly, under the radar, a lot of people automatically were like, oh, well, let's start opening this shit back up. It's not that bad.
Mm-hmm.
Months before that, it's still reality in America. Last year, it was still reality in America. 10 years ago, it was still reality in America. 20, 30, 40 some odd years ago, 100 some odd years ago. And I guess the questions that I have now for a lot of these corporations, a lot of these like people who are now allies is like, did all this have to happen in order for you to like see somebody else who didn't look like you as a human being? Like, to understand how asinine it is for us to have laws on the books that prevent somebody from firing somebody based off of how their hair naturally grows out of their head. Like, we have to, that has to be a law in the United States. That has to be a law. Why? Like, that's not anything wrong with us. You have to ask yourself, what is wrong with you that somebody has to legislate that? The outpouring, like Cuomo here in New York, you know, talking about putting laws, more laws on police to restrict police violence, more laws and more oversight. I think that's part of the issue, but this is like a people problem, not a pen and paper problem. And I think that we have to have a very real discussion about the ideology of white supremacy in this country and the ideology of how that permeates like every facet of society. Mm-hmm. And something as macro as government systems to something as like micro interpersonal as like dating relationships, right? Like colorism, like all of these things culminate in an idea, in a central idea of white supremacy. And I don't know, I'm just in a moment right now of like pause, because there's a rush to action that I think with an idea and a mindset towards Black liberation is always a good thing. But I think coming from a part of like, of being an ally, I question and I wrestle with these questions in terms of, why did it take all of this in order for you to view me as a human being, for you to view us as a human being? Why did it take this? Why? What's wrong with you? That's the question I have, like, what's wrong with you? So that's just where my emotions have been.
No, that's definitely not even the half of it. I'm glad you shared that with us for sure.
Yeah, that brings me to a point I wanted to like ask everybody kind of, because there has been sort of a reckoning, so to say. A lot of companies, whatever, have been kind of either genuinely or disingenuous, however you want to look at it, have been kind of reevaluating how they approach this topic and where they put money towards. We've been reporting news basically all week about these big corporations putting together funds and initiatives towards like all these racial justice and racial, equality measures, and you could be skeptical about it, but the fact of the matter is that there are these companies actually doing it. And what I wanted to ask is like, is this happening within the art world? Because I know the art world also has their own issues with this, and I just haven't really seen it being reported on any like museums or something like that, the way they collect certain pieces historically. And I don't know if you guys have noticed that in the art world, if things are shifting or changing, or if there is sort of their own reckoning going on.
Thanks,
I
Sasha.
mean, for sure. I think Sasha wants to tap in. Is her mic muted, Dario?
Oh, let me get her.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I feel like my phone is gonna die soon, but so I'm like really excited about jumping in. And Marvin, I appreciate you sharing just what's on your heart and mind, because it's really important for you to do that. So like I was really excited about sharing on the other topic too, just about like feelings in the protests and everything. And I think Marvin, you sharing just like how this is something that constantly has been happening. It and in the mix of the pandemic, it is very clear, maybe not blatantly stated, but I think a lot of people put together that folks are protesting in support of ending like the existence of police or police reform. But then there's also a level of people are out there to support the ending of capitalism, or people are out because they're really pissed off about losing their jobs, or people are out because they ain't seen nobody in 4 months and they need some human connection and they need some joy. Like while a lot of the protests are viewed as looting or violent, a lot of them are joyful, and there's a lot of music and there's opportunity to connect with people that may have same or different views as you. And it's just a big testament to that humans, we need each other. So it's an opportunity for people to receive that type of connection. In the art world, and like, I guess how the capitalism distortion of activism that happens, I've definitely helicopter. I've definitely seen it in terms of like which artists are getting commissioned now, and how a lot of corporations and a lot of organizations are starting to reach out to Black artists. I've heard a few folks get emails about like, oh my gosh, we've been following you for so long and we want to do this thing. And some of it is like, they know that there's fire under their ass and they need to fix the representation or lack thereof that they have. And I know at least in the Bay, there's been a lot of artists calling out SF MoMA about their representation practices. Some folks have like boycotted like features that they were gonna get that they're doing right now for COVID. And I know there's a lot of different organizations that are receiving pushback from artists and folks that are like demanding certain things. And something that I've heard that's happening here in the Bay Area is that there's different museums that are planning on collecting or auctioning the protest artwork that people are putting up on all the boarded.
Right, I saw that too.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I guess
the Smithsonian collecting.
Political.
Mm.
So, it's probably different people in different places, and I think that's an interesting component of like with all of the artwork that's being created right now in the streets, who has ownership of it? Is it the artist? Is it Black Lives Matter? Is it whichever movement that these people are connected to, or is it public domain and it's the people or it's the institutions? But just an interesting thing that I've been thinking about a lot in connection to protest art.
Yeah, I've also been thinking about like the hierarchy in museums and how the staff is. And if you look at, you know, the directors are almost all white, the board members are all white, and then the curators mostly white, and then you come down and the security guards are Black, or the administration, the ticketing people are Black. But it's like written in their entire structure. Racism is written in it. I mean, I think like what Marvin, you were talking about, I just think it's like written in the whole structure of this entire country. But a lot of it is like considered to be normal, or you know, just like a lot of people don't even notice some of these things. And a lot of the information that's coming out, I think, is trying to highlight all the misjustices that have been happening that people either considered normal or are unaware of or ignored willingly. And a lot of people are putting in a lot of work on making these kind of bite-sized information bits that is being shared on social media, which is interesting as well. But I don't know, you can see it in the whole system. It's like, how do you go about that? How do you go about actually initiating change beyond them just collecting Black artists' work, or beyond just like a one single paycheck or one single project? How are you gonna, like equity, you know, that's basically what it comes down to. Like, how are you actually gonna make me part of the conversation in a real way and not just like, you know, use me as kind of your shield?
Yeah.
I just thought about that while Sasha was talking.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that is the main questions. Like, how do you, like, where do you go here from now? Like, people are aware, like, this is definitely the biggest pride moment I like socially, civilly in my lifetime. So like, it's like the main question. I was like, where do you head now? Like, where does, like, for protest art, like, where does protest art head now with this huge moment that is going on? And I know all of you guys are involved in it in one way or another, in like different causes, different forms. I just don't know, like, has this kind of influenced any of their artwork or the way you think about your artwork in the future and where it's going to be heading?
I think so. I think in when we talk about like protest art, it's really kind of like, I want to kind of break down like what protest actually is in terms of the context of protest art. If we look at an artist like Emory Douglas, for instance, right, who designed a lot of the imagery for the newsletters and the newspapers for the Black Panther Party. In the action of doing it, Emery is offering his creative tools, in a way, his hands to the revolution in that regard. It's not about a residency. It's not about artist statements. It's not about getting into a gallery. It's not about gallery representation. It's not about market driven. It's about, I'm lending the gifts I have and what I'm good at to Black liberation. And I don't think that, I think the artwork calls that protest art, but for me, that's revolutionary art. And I think there's a difference. I think Aristani also, who was a photographer for the Young Lords in East Harlem, in his capturing the actions and offenses that they took in order for their voices to be heard, in order for simple shit like trash to get picked up in their neighborhood, like the kind of acts that and actions that they took armed, that wasn't about him trying to show a Gagosian. That wasn't him trying to be at Pace. That wasn't him staging that in the National Portrait Gallery. Now, his works are in the Smithsonian now, but at the time, it wasn't about that. And I think, and Dáreece and I talked about it, also Sarah and I have talked about this a lot of times, like there's, in the art world, I think a lot of times there's this slippage where artists come from a place, some artists come from a place of wanting to make work to speak to certain things, but it's the environment of creating that work within the context of, again, another white supremacist institution, which is the fine art world, gets in a slippery slope because you start worrying more about getting a New York Times article than about helping your people, right? Like to stage certain things in a gallery versus actually taking that shit to the streets or taking that to the people where it's actually needed. Those are two very different things. So I just want to like have that in mind. To the earlier point about the art world, the problem with the art world is very simple, right? I have a Sotheby's auction catalog here, right? This is from 2019, March, right? In 2 pages, I can show you what's wrong with the art world. What's wrong with the art world, right there.
Yeah.
This is an auction catalog from Sotheby's. I got another one from Phillips. It's gonna show the same exact thing. This is what's wrong with the art world. Mind you, this is our team over Hong Kong, contemporary. Like, what are we talking? Like, this is what's wrong. The people who are making decisions about curating exhibitions, who are making decisions about the also on the financial end, because art in the context of the contemporary art world is tied with capitalism. Like when we talk about creating a framework for other voices to have a space to speak to real issues, you're talking about a system that is run by people who inherently don't have your best interests at heart and who inherently only want to, like now, put your voices up when it becomes socially acceptable to. Like, you're not an ally if you only step up when it's not scary anymore. Because right now, it's more scary to be a racist. Even though people are like in the street and all this is going on, stuff is on fire, all this other stuff. A lot of the protests are mostly peaceful, no matter what the news says. But right now, for a corporation, the scariest thing for them, the scariest thing for an institution right now is to be pointed out for racism. There's no stakes to stand next to be like, oh, you know what? Let's go try to find a protest artist to put to put in our show next week. Let's go find this. Let's have an auction for this, that, and the third. It's no stakes to it. Like, that's like being in a relationship. You only love me when it's easy. Come on now, like on a like, what's that new edition song? Can you stand the like? Come on, like we're not doing it. We're not doing that. We're not playing that game. But I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
Yeah, and I just want to add on to what you're saying, because we're commercialized, like, so they're not considered about us as people, are the variations and stories that make up everybody. That's not what they actually care about. They care about what sells, what's going to sell, what's the narrative, and what's the story that people are familiar with, that they're comfortable with accepting, and that's going to sell. That's how marketing works. And so now basically it's like they don't really, or this is how it feels to me, it's like they don't really want to give you a voice. They want to use you. They want to sell you, kind of, and sell your vision. So it's just all crap.
Yeah, that is also proven by the fact that there's no health care for the artists. Like, they don't really actually care about you having a sustainable life. They just want to sell your product and profit, and based on the time, so like a specific phase.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I was actually talking a little bit. I mean, that reminds me of stuff like I was mentioning to Sarah about the Black Lives Matter as a shield for storefronts to be vandalized, and how they're not really standing with us, but they put Black Lives Matter in the window so that their shit doesn't get stolen. Yeah. And it was like, just stuff like that would make me feel kind of a way, like, they don't fuck with us, but like, they're really trying to, like, I don't know, just even stuff like that was like on that level of like weird using us, but just like in the moment right now still. And I was just, I don't know. I still feel weird about shit like that. I don't know.
But I also think, and I just want to chime in on this, because when the boarding up first began, I saw an opportunity, as you know, to use it as a platform, right?
Right.
Specifically for underrepresented Black artists and artists of color, and we have to make a living with our art, right? But yet we don't want to sell out our souls and our values to become commodified and part of the capitalist system, but we're already a part of it. So, and I've seen really, really well-known artists, do that pushback publicly, but at the same time, they've already collaborated with brands. They've already done that, like big time brands. And so I'm not throwing shade or anything. It's part of the system that we're all a part of. So how do we balance that? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like that becomes something that is like a really important conversation to have, because we have to pay rent. I mean, ideally, right? Or not ideally. But right now we're trapped in this society. So it's loaded, it's layered. Ultimately it's bullshit. But simultaneously I don't know. It's an important conversation to have.
No.
I'm trying to read these comments in the chat too.
Yeah, I'm reading the comments. Some of the comments are really good. Thank you for the comments.
Yeah, I just want to kind of move on a little bit. Like I do see like some like artists like Dáreece. We currently have a online exhibition with you called Black Fathers Matter, and it's kind of you kind of retaking the image of like underrepresented people, like Black people in this instance, like Black fathers, and kind of taking it and moving it in a way, instead of just necessarily protesting something, kind of taking it and reinterpreting it and like rebranding it, if anything, and in a way, an imagery that you don't typically see in like the mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I created that series because I thought, you know, because it's like we've been saying, it's always here, you know, and like it keeps happening, and like, you know, we keep protesting, and you know, it's like let's see some positive images, you know, like let's see like what normal happiness looks like, or just an average day, you know, where there's no sort of expectations or pressure put on, you know, the Black body so much as just them being themselves. That's sort of like where that kind of work comes from. But it's like, you know, like I remember actually Melvin, your work that like compared sort of like the cop violence with like video games and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because like I think there's a lot to be said about just like how we see images and like the things that happen every day.
Yeah, right. So I mean that I used to watch. I was never really much into video games, but I used to watch my friends play a lot of video games, and I was always really fascinated when they were playing the video games, and there was that screen that you could like go out to where you could see where your position was on the map or on the world or whatever game you were in, and I thought that was really interesting that the game world has this conception that they're able to do that at some point, you know, you can get this your positioning in a total world, and so they come up with this entire re-rendered world, and they have to fill it with ideology, and it just seems to me that though the people that are doing that that programming, the people working at those companies are kind of the they're of the faith of this current technocracy, right? They believe in the kind of the things of I mean, that's a lot to get into, but of the same kind of ontology as, say, like Mark Zuckerberg or those guys. They have a very specific way of looking at the world, right? It's like this Catholic, Christian, but anyway, they, through them, and if you go to those companies, there's not a lot of people of color doing this kind of work. I mean, especially here in LA, you know, all of these creative industries are pretty heavily whitewashed. So then they render this ideology through the game, and you see all of this violence through the game, and it's like supposed to be some kind of ironic re-representation of the United States gone wrong, and it looks actually like a much tamer version of the United States, you know. And this POV that the cop sees, this and I think that's been one of the things that has upset me. Like Marvin says, it's so difficult to talk about this because you just moved in so many different ways, because I can't really remember a first racist experience, you know. It's always been this way, and then it's different degrees of it. And so then this like white, patriarchal, hegemonic, hyper capitalist, inherited from like mercantilism, that America is like what you have, and you have it like from every like Sarah said, it's really innate to the system. It's how people got here, it's how people established their wealth, it's how their ideology believes that their identity is constituted, you know, as founders, as pilgrims, as farmers, you know, not as like thieves, plunderers, rapists, slave owners, that kind of thing. So I think that the problem that you're dealing with is that it is innate to every part of the structure. You know, like getting rid of the police is a mission in itself. And then politics is next. Then you have this crazy healthcare. Then you have this crazy work system with like 5 days, all for profit. Or the whole thing is just very badly constructed and inefficient. And I think for it to work, it needs to identify you. It needs to give you an identity so that it can sell shit to you. And that's what's happening right now, is that Target or watch Wendy's next, any of these places, there's profit in being pro people of color at the moment. There's money to be made. And I'd be fooling myself if I thought it was some kind of benevolence, because again, like Marvin said, like we've been here so many different times, that the only really real difference now is that it's sort of fashionable to put that on your Instagram right now, you know, or to black out your Facebook or something right now.
Performative allyship.
Yeah. Do you see like many differences between here and, let's say, like England, and the way, you know, the conversation is going or has been had?
Yeah, I mean, it's the most it's ever been in England. That's the truth. I had this white professor, he was English, and he told me that he thought that racism was just as bad in England and Europe, but it was just there's not as many brown people, so it's not as big a deal. It kind of gets swept under the rug. And that's how my childhood was. Like it was like 5 people that were black in the town that I grew up. So that's what I'm saying. I never had a first racist experience. It was just all the time. Yeah.
Like, I think this issue is not, obviously right now it's really about, you know, the black experience and black all that, but it's not just with, you know, it's not just a black issue. There's also, like, Sarah, you also have your own exhibitions where you know, you have the hijab out in public and you kind of capture those responses. I don't know if you feel like that also needs to be part of the conversation going on right now, because there's also
I think it already is. I mean, the way I kind of see it is that, like I said in the beginning, is that this movement of Black Lives Matter, it affects everybody. And for me, my personal relationship with it is that I've actually gained a lot of strength from it in how to deal with living in America as, like, not the norm, ideal, whatever version of what they say you're supposed to be. And like, when I moved here I think I was like 17, I didn't understand what was going on around me. Like, I didn't understand why everybody, like Melvin said, had specific labels, like, and they all dressed in their specific label. In high school, like, you would go to the lunchroom and everybody was in their own group and they were very specifically labeled. They dressed, they listened to music, they talked a specific way, and they were all very much like these caricatures of themselves, I guess. And like, that was just very weird to me, and I didn't really understand where I fit in it. And I guess what's brought me to this place is realizing that my narrative has never been told as a mixed person, with my experiences, and people almost refuse to believe it or listen to it because it's so far off from what they're normally, you know, used to when thinking of like an Iranian or a Muslim, or, you know, like, you get like, well, you don't look Muslim, you don't look Iranian, I don't know what that means, you know, like, there's just been a lot of, you know, these types of experiences. And, you know, obviously I have my own privilege. I don't have an accent, which allows me a lot of space. I'm lighter skinned, so that I can get it into places that, like, my father had a problem getting into. And, like, you know, just seeing all that growing up, And then becoming more familiar with like writing and books that Black activists, especially women, have written, and then seeing that be like applied and how much I can relate to what it is. And they're like almost guiding you through how to get through this a little bit. And just like my experience with my friends, I mean, the people that opened their arms up to me were all people of color, or Black people, or gay and lesbian people, or fat people. Like they were all in some way being marginalized. And I guess, yeah, I think this conversation already applies to me. Like, I don't think that we need to veer off in any specific way or another. It all is related. And we're all are like, I don't know, Melvin, you were saying, or Marvin, but like you were saying that, you know, we're all working in this system, and only a few people at the very top are truly benefiting from it, but the rest of us are getting the shitty end, you know. And I think if we could like somehow band together, we could take over. But like, so I feel like there's a lot of people who feel these things very real and are going through it. And if we could somehow harness this energy, yeah, so that's how I feel.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, the big question, like, how do you keep moving forward? And I think, as we've seen, this isn't just an American issue. The whole world is basically, you know, out in protest right now, and it's basically a global issue. And Georgia, I kind of want to touch on some of your work and your experiences, and, you know, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that and how, you know, a lot of your work deals with like forced immigration and, you know, refugee work and stuff like that, especially coming from like Turkey to Greece and stuff.
Yeah, there's like the global refugee crisis is not over. I mean, it hasn't been in the news for the last 2 years as much as it used to be, but it's far from over. And people live in terrible conditions in all over Europe, Greece specifically, and now with the quarantine, refugees will arrive and they will like have no access to any aid. They will just like let them be on beaches. When the refugee crisis started in Europe in 2015, I did the series of public performances called #OrangeVest, where I created like small visual protests. The biggest one was constituted by like 30 people, where everybody was wearing a life vest and black clothes in the memory of the people that lost their lives trying to cross over in Europe. And it was a very interesting experience. And again, many times I came across people telling me that like, oh, the refugees that are arriving in Greece, they don't look like refugees, they're fat, they have good clothes. Or comments like from professors at school that they will be like, do refugees perform their trauma?
Oh, wow.
Which I found it very offensive. Like, imagine someone saying like, oh, Black Lives Matter activists, do they perform their trauma?
Yeah.
And what it really sacked me during those protests right now in the midst of a pandemic is that we are so fed up with the situation and the racial injustice in this country that, and especially the fact that it affects a big numbers in the Black and Hispanic communities. People were like, what's the point of staying in, not to get affected and die from a virus, if I'm going to die by police brutality? It's like one way or another, like it's better to go out and protest my rights, even if I get the virus and die, than staying home and die like 3 years later by a cab somewhere.
Mm.
And it's very interesting for me because coming from Europe, I came from a different reality. It's not totally different, but it's a different reality. So there were some like Black people around when I was growing up. We had like one Black kid in the whole high school. I didn't see much of racism, but probably I wasn't exposed to it because of my community and the way I was raised. I saw a lot of bullying towards people that look different, like physically different, which is not much of a difference. And then when I came here, I was shocked by the racial injustice and racism, and by the fact that there's no universal health care. And then as creatives, we are expected to create art and make statements so institutions and collectors can profit from us and from our work, while at the same time, we are totally exposed to poverty, to disease, to racism, etc.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I find that very interesting, like the differences in culture, especially like the US and Europe. And like Marvin, you are American, but you also have that African kind of background. And, you know, Melvin, you're from London, and Sarah, Iranian. Like, I don't know if how do you guys like marriage those two worlds together, like when it comes in terms of like your artwork and stuff like that?
Still trying to figure it out.
Well, I think that, oh, go ahead, Marvin.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think that that was what informed the way that I make art and how I even began, really. That I was looking for an identity because English white people didn't accept me and Black American people didn't accept me. So I was, and both of them kind of thought that I was playing for the other team, so to speak. Like oh, you're actually half white, or you're actually half Black. But you're only ever Black, you know? Nobody takes that. I never got pulled over and the cops asked me to step out and they're like, what is your heritage? And I told them half white and they're like, oh, well, get back in the car, you're fine to go. People just see it, you know, as face value. So I trying to find, okay, so I'm half American, half English. Well, my mum's a quarter Welsh, and then she thinks her dad's American. But then her family that are Welsh, they're really Celtic. Well, if they're actually Celtic, then they're Teutonic, right? So if they're actually Teutonic, then they're from Africa. So I didn't know where to draw the line, and it seemed really arbitrary for me to say that I'm this or I'm that. And the same goes for gender as well, you know, that somehow me being male means all the same things as like I'm monogamic, heterosexual, you know, this kind of fidelity. All of these things get wrapped here. And I think that's one of the most unique things about capitalism, is that far from being the numbers game that it makes out to be, it's actually something that pretends to be something else, you know, and it has all of these mystic back channels and occult ways of working.
Mm.
I think for me, I definitely have used my practice in a while to kind of try to suss out some of the more, I guess, complex kind of ideas of like a sort of cross-cultural identity. It's been, I mean, growing up in America, and it's all about labels. It's all about positioning yourself, like what are you? Where, like what box, so somebody else can know how to treat you. Like where are you from? and
What's your religion?
religion, all of these things. So for me, growing up, like half my family coming up, half my family's Catholic, the other half was Muslim. I'm in a mostly Black and Latino neighborhood. My father speaks Spanish, French, and English fluently, and our native language of indigenous language of Jula. My mother and my father both come from two different ethnic groups, completely different ethnic groups in the same country that speaks over 60 some odd dialects. And then in Atlanta, like it's like, oh, I'm growing up in DeKalb County, but then it's just like there's all these divisions. When you start to figure it, it's just like, okay, so where am I from? Like that's the question. Where home was for me constantly. I think that question that came with identity, because that was what I was most focused on, was like, what's home for me, right? Who are my people? Because everything almost felt like a part of me, but not fully where I felt at home. And Atlanta felt like home, but not quite. Half my family's in Maryland. I spent that in vacation in the DMV area. That felt like home, but not quite. When I went to the Ivory Coast for the first time, I remember stepping off the plane, and there was like a grounding feeling. Like it's almost like I felt gravity for the first time stepping out of that plane. Like almost like I've been on the moon this entire time. And when I got off the plane in West Africa, it was just like, boom. Like there was a certain kind of, it was like a physical experience of feeling rooted to the soil. But even then, it still didn't feel like home completely. And I think in all of this search and all of these exterior elements of where home was and who I was, the realization came when I journeyed inward and I started to look at myself. Like home is wherever like I feel safe, wherever I feel loved. And I think when you break down a lot of these more complex issues to like, which I do often in my work, to just like on a human, emotional, like kind of just day-to-day level, when Black people are talking about stop killing us in the street, that's me saying, I want to feel safe to go outside. That's me saying, I want to feel okay to just be me in public. I want to go outside and breathe air without feeling threatened. I want to be able to
jog,
for people to have like children. I want to be able to raise my children. I want to be able to walk my dog. I want to be able to bird watch in Central Park and be okay. I want to be able to like dress in drag and go to a fucking drag show and not be accosted in the street. I want to be able to no matter how the fuck I present to you in right now, to be like, address me as them, she, whatever have you, and you should do that without it being a threat to my existence. When you break it down to humanity, it's about, again, people just wanting to be treated and afforded the rights and privileges that they should be afforded for just existing. Like, you were born, you have life. Why do you feel the need to like impede somebody else's existence for what? All of this shit about like corporations and racism, all that other stuff, like the problem, like I'm not gonna say the cop's name because whatever, but the issue in the situation of a cop kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, that, yes, the police are over militarized. Yes, the police departments in the United States bought a lot of the surplus, got a lot of surplus equipment from the military and are heavily militarized, and our police are militarized to the point where our police force, if you put them together, could take on an army of another country. Yes, but the root of that is there was a human being behind that badge who didn't see their equal in the person that they were killing on the floor. There is, when you see a bunch of, like, a mob of people attacking a trans woman in a gas station, it's because they don't see their equal in her. Like, it's like, unless you're doing the daily ritual of ridding yourself, because what we were talking about earlier about, like, technology and all of these things and all these people who create these things, and they're almost imbuing their creative output with their inherent biases. So when we're fighting against that, it's literally, you're fighting against people's ideology, and at the root of that is everybody has to take accountability for that structure that's in them. Like, unless you wake up every morning with the mindset to rid yourself of white supremacy, because you're being conditioned every day. It's in our media, it's in the music, it's in everything. Unless you're doing that as a daily practice, you can march in the street, you can do all this, like, putting up posters, you could wear the shirts, you could wear the hoodies, you could say Black Lives Matter, you can support Black and brown artists, but unless you're doing the work interiorly, you doing work on the interior to rid yourself of that, you're not really safe to be around. You're not really, you can't be counted on to be an ally. You can't be trusted. So it's really down to just the simplicity of understanding that it is like, all of this is nothing but, like, exterior representations of how the collective consciousness is under a white supremacist patriarchal system. Like, this is what it is. Like, you have to get to the point where people understand that this is a personal thing first. You have to journey inward and rid yourself of that. It's almost on some, like, extracting somebody from a cult and deprogramming them from this conditioning. Like, you have to do that work. Everybody has to do that work. Because literally, if you look at everything, it's everywhere. It's like, it's everywhere. It's in dating apps. There's a reason why Black women, like, Black women statistically have, like, really, like, poor statistics on dating apps. There's a reason for that shit. There's a reason for colorism. There's a reason for like, all of these other things that we think are, like, outliers. Oh, it's just racism. Oh, it's this, oh, it's that. Like, it's all rooted in something. So unless you attack the root, which exists in everybody, you don't really solve the problem. All of this shit is just like, you have the flu, but you just taking, like, a cough drop to try to, like, oh, I'm tired of coughing, but you still got the flu. Like, you got to deal with it.
I like that point about deprogramming. So, I mean, my next question is, where do you see, like, art's role in sort of the next phase of, like, deprogramming people's thoughts and intentions, and particularly, I don't know if you guys want to speak about your specific art that you guys are working on, or just art in general, like, where do you think its role is in doing that?
Before we move on, right after Marvin, you just answered, why now? Because it's work. And when you're living in a world, when one lives in a world that everything is catered to them, like the white cis man, why would they bother? Because that confrontation to go against everything that you've been taught, that you are the chosen one, like, why do the work? Just I'll get all the things. And that's why now, because it's like at this moment, no one can hide from it. It's everywhere. So back to your question, Dario, what do we do now? What do we do with our art? How do we continue the momentum, you know? I'm just documenting it. That's all I got. Like, I haven't processed it. I'm just documenting it.
Okay.
But that's what I can do, like, as an individual photographer. So I don't have anything else.
Okay.
I think as human beings, we tend to forget very fast. And I think part of the artist's responsibility is to constantly remind the public, the audience, that certain issues are not being solved and are not going to be solved if we throw them under the carpet, and we have to confront them daily, as Marvin said.
Anybody else? Dáreece, you got any ideas?
I mean, you know, I mean, art is interesting. Artists create culture and create waves without trying, because they just create because they must, and then like what they make catches on, and then that becomes status quo. So it's like, I think right now, it's just the people who are going to be the most creative in terms of trying to figure out this thing, like, you know, institutions that are creating an entire new group of people, you know, that meet together to maybe oversee specific, you know, elements of their business that pertain to diversity and people of color and programming integration, so that it's not just Black art in February or on Juneteenth. Oh, actually, Juneteenth's coming up. We didn't mention that, but you know, things like, I mean, Juneteenth should be recognized nationally as a national holiday. You know, things like that could be like major change. And I think, you know, artists, you know, putting voices out for things like that might be interesting. But it's hard to say like what the next step is per se, except as individuals, like Ventiko was saying, we can all look at ourselves and see what we can contribute ourselves. You know, is that you know, developing my ideas and putting forth an effort, like the project Black Fathers Matter that I came up with, because I feel like a lot of people responded to positive images that I really wanted to create right now, because they were seeing so many fucked up images of you know, George Floyd, and just like people, Black bodies, Black death, and like that sort of like promotes your worth. Like the more you see bodies that look like you that aren't alive, and it just like casting through a screen and being the dialogue, and you know, you seen the cops have to be like, there has to be an international outcry for a trickle-in effect of justice. You know, those things, I think that these conversations are allowing, like Ventiko said, everyone to sort of be a little bit more aware. The white man has to, you know, he's forced to listen to us. Like he has to eavesdrop on the hard conversations people are having about him. You know, like he can't just laugh it off now. Like he has to go outside. So, you know, he has to look these people in the face and understand why they're looking at him like that. So like, I don't know. I think we're just gonna keep on doing our things, and you know, just trying to reach more people and try not to silence others. You know, try to listen and try to share.
I think because we're in now we're in a time where like there's a new podcast popping up every week. There's a new like type of media coming out every week. I think there is more of an awareness of the power of visuals and the power of imagery on a consciousness of a society. And I think that as artists, musicians, designers, dancers, what have you, performance artists, I think that a shift in the focus away from trying to climb up a lot of the traditional ladders that we've been, taught to put on a pedestal, and more so for those of us who've been doing the work and others to like continue to push new stories to the forefront, to continue to push work that's human, I think, and it's wild to say that that's revolutionary, but because of how fucked up of a society that we live in, it's revolutionary to just make work that's human. Like, and I think the more we can flood the airways and flood the galleries and flood the streets, so to speak, with imagery and voices of people who've been quiet and people who've been silenced for so long, I think that we can start to help to create like a different dynamic and a real shift in terms of, not in a matter of like trying to convince somebody else of our humanity, but in some way of like existing fully in our humanity no matter what the fuck happens, like regardless of expectation. And I know it's hard because jobs, I know it's hard because the art world doesn't give any healthcare for anybody, whether it's educators, whether it's like art handlers, whether it's framers, whatever have you, studio assistants, anything. And a lot of us do those jobs and then also have art practices. And a lot of times you can't make a livable wage on one of those jobs and have an art practice, and you have to kind of cobble together a bunch of different things. But our voices are important, and they have to be protected, and they need to be championed. And I don't know specifically how that looks. I don't know what the art world looks like in 10 years, 15 years. But if anything, we have to get louder. And I think the work has to become more unapologetically human, and not in a way of shying away from the full complexity, oftentimes grotesque, maybe contradictory nature of what it means to be human, and to do that dance in front of everybody without expectations of like gallery representation or anything or all of that other bullshit. Like, you just have to, it's being. I think that's a step in the right direction.
Great. All right, open up to some questions. We got a really good one here from Denise Keys. Anybody can answer this. Artists define the last major political movements in this country with the Black Arts Movement and Black Power movements on a global scale. What are the identified characteristics of today's era of political art?
Banksy.
Yeah.
I think Ventiko has unmute Ventiko.
Ventiko's muted.
Thank you. Did you just say Banksy?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what I wanted to be unmuted for, just to confirm that. If it's okay, I just wanted to answer personally the last part of the three-part question, the last question, if that's okay.
Should Black artists and artists of color be on the front lines of naming the era and documenting it?
That's what I wanted to refer to, the last section, the last two words, documenting it.
Absolutely.
Just because that relates directly to my personal experience with documenting the protests. I've actually made a big focus on documenting the photographers, documenting the scene, and just showing, like, personally, I'm not publishing them anywhere or whatever, maybe on my Instagram, but then if it's faces, and I'm like, I don't want to put them out there, and then the government and all the things. But I really, it's like, you can visually see when you look at the images, you can see how the narrative is shifting. The amount of photographers that are Black, like all men, is like, it's half and half, which is awesome. I would like to see more women up there. So yes, I definitely think that the all the control should be completely shifted. Like, it should just, like, it should be shifted. And then by continuing that, then we actually can see, as the masses, we actually can see the entirety of the story. No longer are the people controlling the narrative, the press, the white press, like all of that. We actually can see a shift in perspective, which will further enhance everyone's understanding of the human experience, right? And then if we can continually, I know this is so naive, but I think that there's really power in this, just shifting the tools of power. Like you have, oh, it's so great to see people with like all these different cameras, and some of them have film, which is really, really exciting. Like this turn back to film. It's just so inspiring, you know, because it's like, before, it's like watching the same thing over and over again, like Marvin the books with all the leaders and all the gatekeepers. They're all white. They're mostly men. Like, it's so boring. Enough already. I don't know about you all, but like, I don't really get that much going to a museum. Seeing the same thing over and over again. Yeah, I got it. Next. It's very limiting to the full understanding of the human experience. I just wanted to say that.
Oh, yeah. Good points.
I think that one of us should offer Venice like a genuine answer to that. What is political movements in this country? What are the identified characteristics of today's era of political art? The reason I said Banksy is because, you know, at least originally, there was this attempt not to have any credit for it, right? Not to be known for it, and there to be no real provenance of the art, you know, which is kind of what the art world works off of, right? Because in 50 years, that Warhol isn't going to be worth any less. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
No, I don't know that all of a sudden white investors are going to want to invest in Black art, and if they are, it's only because they want to make a return on it, you know. So the authentic political art in this era, I think it doesn't have a face, but everything else hopefully is discursive, you know, like hopefully everything else is not about certain positions and postulations, and it's more about a dialogue, and that artistic practices and works of that kind that inspire people to talk about these things and rework their ideas of how they formulate identity or whatever conceptions.
I do have a question. Like, what do you guys feel? Like, what do you guys think about Banksy in particular? Because, like, you threw it out jokingly, but to a layman, like somebody who's not really well informed on art, he is kind of the guy that they point towards when it comes to like political and social kind of art at the moment.
I don't really think about him at all, to be honest. Like he's like that's a joke move from the art world, to be real. Like it is a like Banksy probably has an MFA from somewhere. And Banksy has a lot of art world ties, and it's positioned and it's an illusion. It's an illusion of like counter cultural, very like outsider, but it's it's really rooted in a lot of the tropes of quote unquote political art in the art world. Like I don't really think about Banksy at all. Go ahead, Georgia.
It's with Banksy, it seems that what he's doing is political art, but in reality it's an iconography of political art.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like he's underground, and that he's like, we don't know who he is, but there are galleries that represent him and sell his graffiti at art fairs. So it's an interesting persona, but I think when we talk about political art, it has to be something deeper than just creating iconography.
Fact. It's like I mean, he's like a Black Lives Matter Starbucks shirt. That's what
Right.
which is what they're actually, Starbucks is actually.
Logo and everything. Like the logo got to be on the front too. Right?
Logo got to be there. I think political art kind of, to me, when I think about art, I'm not thinking about the discipline of the fine art world. I'm just thinking about like creative output across. And I think because of the politics of the societies that we operate in, a lot of these like westernized cultures, a lot of things that, again, are just human expressions end up becoming political. So Misty Copeland is political of just who she is. Like LeBron James is political. I mean, he says stuff, but even if he didn't do anything and shut up and dribble, as I ain't gonna mention her name, whatever he said, even if he didn't do anything, he is political.
Stephen A. Smith, even, you know.
Well, he be on some wild stuff sometimes. I would say
political.
like Rhapsody in her music. Like that's like political art. I think like Kendrick and his music. I think this era Beyonce, right? Like this era Beyonce is political. So I'm thinking to answer your question, I think that the identifying characteristics, I think, of today's political era, it's about an unapologetic expression of one's humanity in spaces that have historically tried to silence that voice. Historically didn't respect, identify, or laud your humanity. And I think that, like Colin Kaepernick, for instance, in the NFL, like him just kneeling in a protest, that's seen as a political act. That's him feeling the reality of what's going on in his country, right? Like these are all like the Williams sisters. Like, I mean, in tennis, I mean, I'm just like, we talk about like things about like the cat suit. Like, why is that even a thing? The act of being human in these spaces is political. The characteristics right now is being unapologetically yourself, because a lot of times that shit can get you killed. That's what political art is in this era. And we have more technology now to be able to like spread these voices across the globe. And I mean, shit. The president of the United States is on some wild shit every day, every damn day. He's just on some like next level stuff. But the funny thing about it, the underlying root is like Trump is just a regular white dude. Like, there's actually nothing extraordinary about the way he's acting. He's nothing. He's just a symptom of the country. And for so long, like, white men have had the, and white people in general have had the room and the free reign to be able to unapologetically exist as themselves in this space without company. So now you got to make room. And we've been asking them for you to make room. And now we're going to tell you that you need to make room. We're going to make you make room because, and it's not just make room so I can like stand in the corner, but I want to dance on the floor also. Mm-hmm. And I want to be able to run around here also. And yes, it's dangerous because we live in a place where people won't allow you and don't want you to be human. But that's, I think, a real characteristic of I guess today's era of political art is like, it's like an unapologetic expression of humanity.
Like that. This is last question. Does it make a difference to have more established groups like Spiral, Where We Are Art Inc., or Afra Cobra?
I mean, it's definitely good to group up in different ways, but I guess you gotta, I'm not particularly familiar with these groups, so I don't know, but I think it's still important to join organizations that you believe in that will help guide your energy and passion in a productive way. But I wanted to say earlier that I don't think it's any one way. Like, a lot of people are going about this in different ways, and I think there's room for everybody's voice and style. And like Marvin said, I agree very much so that you just be kind of unapologetically yourself, and this is such a new territory for a lot of artists of color and Black artists, I think, because I felt reprimanded in the past for doing that, or misunderstood, or just seemed to be irrelevant. And I find myself in the past 2 years just creating things that explain my own cultural complexities in my own world, and not have to defend myself as much, or my country, or my culture, or not have to defend my humanity as much, but like that this is me. I finally feel empowered enough. I finally feel like I have enough power to do this. But I'm still figuring it out, I guess, as I go on what it exactly will look like. I don't know yet.
All right. Yeah, so I think like I said, this is a great time, to use your voice and your own agency, especially as an artist, to kind of, express yourself fully, because I think the whole world is kind of watching and listening and then anticipating like what's the next phase. And I definitely think art and protest art and artists like you guys are going to be a big part of that next step and that next push towards, hopefully more equality and better changes that, that people are desperately like hoping for. But before we kind of get out of here, I don't know if you guys are working on anything, if people should be looking out for anything that you already have out there. If you guys want to kind of let people know about that. Dáreece, you go first, because obviously we have our digital stuff.
Yeah, so, everybody watching, Living Life Fearless, and I have collaborated on my first digital show, and we have merch. Dario's wearing a shirt, I'm wearing a shirt. Sarah's actually got one on too. And yeah, there's prints available, and proceeds from the show go back to the artist. Actually, 15% of the proceeds are being donated to the Artist Relief Fund, and that's something I started that we wanted to do before the opening of the digital exhibition. But then as the quarantine went on, more fucked up shit happened, and George Floyd passed. So in honor of the protesting, we've offered the George Floyd code for any of my Black Fathers Matter merch, and that'll give you a discount plus direct contribution to Black organized non-profits. So yeah, that's at livinglifefearless.com. And just follow me on Instagram to keep up with whatever other stuff I got going on.
All right. Anybody else want to just talk about anything that going on? Or?
Me started, just one at a time, just outro. No.
All right. Well, we will have links and social, like we'll have like your info in the description. We'll have links to certain things. But thank you guys for joining us. Thank you for everybody who kind of jumped into the chat and asked questions and just watched and just kind of participated. We really appreciate that. Thank you guys, all the artists, for joining us in this artist roundtable, our first one. You know, still working out the kinks, but I think it went pretty well. I had a lot of great input from you guys, and you know, hopefully we'll do something like this again.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dario. Thanks, Dáreece.
Thanks, Dario. Thanks, Therese. Thanks, Marvin.
Thank everybody
Bye.
for coming.
Stay safe, guys.
Thank you, Georgia.
Yeah, all the
Thanks.
guests. Thank you, everyone that came to watch.
Thank
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.